Listen to me. There comes a moment in every believer's life where comfort becomes the enemy of conviction. A moment when God stops whispering and starts shaking the ground beneath your feet. And for many Adventists today, that shaking is happening right now. Because the Sabbath, God's holy set-apart day, has become routine, mechanical, predictable. A day of habits instead of a day of holiness. But I came to tell you, God did not give the Sabbath so we could coast. He gave it so we could stand against the world, stand against deception, stand against compromise, stand against the system that is coming for your mind, your loyalty, and your worship. The Sabbath was never meant to be a day where you check the box. It was meant to be the seal that aligns your life with heaven, the sign that you belong to the King of Kings, not the king of culture. But too many of God's people are slipping, drifting, losing the urgency, losing the fire, losing the fear of God. And when the crisis hits, when the laws change, when the pressure comes, ritual will not save you, only relationship will. So listen carefully. There are mistakes Adventists keep making, and if you don't stop them now, they will cost you more than you can afford to lose. You cannot treat the Sabbath lightly and expect to stand strongly. You cannot live casually and expect to endure prophetically. You cannot play with the world and expect to survive the test. This is not a day to be half awake spiritually. This is not a time to be halfway in and halfway out. This is the hour to get serious with God, because the world is getting serious about deception. You were called to be a remnant. You were called to be different. You were called to shine when others bow. But you cannot shine if you're spiritually asleep before the crisis even begins. So I'm asking you, no. I'm challenging you. Return to the heart of the Sabbath before the world forces you to choose between comfort and conviction. Return before the pressure comes. Return before the mark is enforced. Return before it's too late, because the real battle is not coming. It has already begun in the choices you make every week. And the Sabbath is not just a commandment. It is a weapon, a shield, a seal, a sign, a test, and a lifeline in the days ahead. Wake up, stand up, rise up. God didn't give you truth so you could sleep on it. He gave you Ruth so you could live it, guard it, and carry it into the final conflict with boldness and unshakable loyalty. Adventist, stop these Sabbath mistakes, because when the world turns completely dark, it will be too late to fix what you refuse to confront. Too many Adventists have fallen into a dangerous rhythm. Not a rhythm of holiness, but a rhythm of habit. Week after week, the Sabbath comes and goes like a familiar routine. Sunset on Friday, quick prayer, a sigh of relief, a few hours of church, a predictable lunch, a long nap, maybe a walk, maybe a hymn or two, then back to the same life as before. The day is kept on the calendar, but the heart is barely involved. And while everything looks right on the outside, something sacred is quietly dying on the inside. Because God never intended the Sabbath to be a ritual you perform. He intended it to be a relationship you pursue. When the Sabbath becomes nothing more than a schedule, it loses its power to change you. When it becomes routine, it stops restoring you. When it becomes tradition, it stops transforming you. And that is the danger many Adventists did not see. You can keep the Sabbath faithfully with your hands and still break it entirely with your heart. Ritual can disguise spiritual decay. Ritual can make you feel safe while your relationship with God is slipping. Ritual gives you the impression of obedience while hiding the absence of intimacy. The Sabbath was given as a gift, a sanctuary, in time where God Himself steps into your life in a deeper way. But how can you hear His voice if you treat the day like a checklist? How can you grow if your spirit is asleep the moment worship begins? How can you receive His peace if your mind is still trapped in the noise of the week? The Sabbath was meant to be experienced, not endured. It was meant to bring you face to face with the God who created you, saved you, and calls you His own. But when it becomes ritual, you lose the wonder, you lose the awe, you lose the encounter. Some Adventists come to the Sabbath like people attending a ceremony they've been to 100 times, present but disconnected, listening but not hearing, standing but not surrendering. They know the hymns, the order of service, the Pathfinder uniforms, the memory verses, the Sabbath school discussions, but familiarity can turn holiness into background noise. You can sit in a church pew and be miles away from God. You can sing songs about His glory while your heart is cold. You can read scripture without letting it read you. God is not impressed with well-rehearsed religion. He is moved by surrendered hearts. The Sabbath is not a day for performance. It is a day for presence. Your presence in His presence. Your heart leaning toward, your thoughts lifted above the stress, the worry, the temptation, the routine. It is a day to breathe differently, think differently, walk differently. But modern Sabbath keeping often reduces it to responsibilities. Be on time, follow the program, avoid certain activities, complete the expected duties. And in all of this structure, the relationship gets lost. When the crisis comes, when worship is challenged, when laws are passed, when loyalty is tested, ritual will crumble. It will not hold you. It will not strengthen you. It will not keep you. Only relationship will. Only a living, breathing, genuine connection with God will give you the courage to stand when the world bows. And that connection is built every Sabbath, not through rules but through relationship, not through habit but through hunger. This is why you must return to the heart of the Sabbath before it is too late. You must reclaim the holiness, the intimacy, the stillness. You must enter the day not as an obligation, but as an invitation to rediscover the God who desires your heart more than your routine. Because the Sabbath is not just a day you keep, it is a day that keeps you. It protects you, shapes you, shields you, and prepares you. But only if you meet God inside it. Stop treating the Sabbath as a ritual. Start treating it as a relationship. That shift will determine who you become and how you stand in the final crisis. One of the most overlooked spiritual dangers among Adventists today is the habit of stumbling into the Sabbath without preparation. People slide into Friday evening, exhausted, stressed, mentally scattered, spiritually empty, carrying the weight of the entire week on their backs, and then expect the Sabbath to magically revive them. But the Sabbath was never designed to heal what you refuse to prepare for. You cannot rush into the most sacred day of the week and expect to encounter the fullness of God. Holiness requires preparation long before the sun sets. Too many believers treat the Sabbath like a sudden stop instead of a divine appointment. They wait until Friday afternoon to clean the house, wash the clothes, iron the outfits, cook the meals, finish the errands, send the emails, scroll through the distractions, argue with the family, worry about bills, plan next week's work, and then when the sun drops, they try to switch instantly into worship mode. But by that time, the spirit is drained, the mind is cluttered, and the heart is nowhere near the peace God intended. Rushing into the Sabbath is not simply poor planning, it is spiritually dangerous. It trains your soul to approach holy things casually. And what you approach casually, you will eventually approach carelessly. The Israelites understood preparation. The day before the Sabbath was not just another day. It was the day of intentional readiness. Food was prepared in advance. Work was finished. Minds were calm. Households were ordered. They physically and mentally created space for God. The Sabbath didn't surprise them. They stepped into it with expectation. That is why they could enjoy its blessing. Preparation wasn't a burden, it was an act of love. It was a declaration that God deserved more than leftovers of time, energy, and attention. Today, many Adventists have lost that mindset. The Sabbath doesn't begin on Friday evening. It often begins with chaos, and chaos kills communion. You cannot worship deeply when your mind is wrestling with unfinished tasks. You cannot rest in God when your spirit is still entangled in the noise of the week. Without preparation, you don't end the Sabbath. You crash into it, and crashing into sacred time leaves you spiritually numb. The tragedy is this: the Sabbath is supposed to be the most peaceful day of the week. Yet for many, it is the most stressful. Why? Because the battle is lost before the day even begins. The spiritual blessings that God pours out during the Sabbath require a heart that is ready to receive. But if you spend your entire week rushing, pushing, grinding, and only remember God's holy day at the last moment, your soul becomes too tired to hear His voice. Preparation is not about legalism. It is about alignment. It is about letting your life slow down so your spirit can wake up. When you prepare for the Sabbath ahead of time, everything changes. Your Friday evening becomes peaceful, not frantic. Your worship becomes deeper, not distracted. Your prayers become clearer. Your connection with God becomes stronger. You walk into the Sabbath with anticipation, not exhaustion. And here is the deeper truth. How you prepare for the Sabbath each week is preparing you for the final test of loyalty. If you cannot discipline yourself to honor the Sabbath now when it is easy, free, and unhindered, how will you stand when keeping it costs you everything? Preparation creates spiritual resilience. It trains your heart to prioritize God above everything else. It builds the kind of strength you will need in the crisis ahead. Rushing into the Sabbath weakens your foundation. Preparing for the Sabbath fortifies it. The choice is yours every week. The blessing is waiting for you, but so is the responsibility. God is calling you to approach His holy day with intention, honor, and expectation, because the way you enter the Sabbath determines the way the Sabbath enters you. One of the greatest misunderstandings among Adventists today is the belief that the Sabbath is only about physical rest. Many people collapse into the Sabbath like they collapse into their beds after a long day, tired, drained, relieved that the week is finally over. They treat the Sabbath as a day to sleep, to unwind, to relax from work, to take a break from stress. And while rest is part of the Sabbath blessing, it was never meant to be the whole blessing. God did not create the Sabbath simply to give you time off. He created it to restore what the week has taken from your soul. When the Sabbath becomes only a day of rest and not a day of restoration, you miss the deepest purpose of the gift. Rest affects the body, but restoration reshapes the spirit, renews the mind, strengthens the faith, and reconnects you to your divine assignment. This is where many Adventists fall short. They come into the Sabbath exhausted, sleep most of the day, eat, relax, talk with friends, maybe listen to a sermon, and then leave the day no stronger spiritually than they entered it. Their body is refreshed, but their spirit is still thirsty. They return to work on Sunday rested, but not revived. Monday finds them with the same fears, the same temptations, the same stress, the same spiritual weakness that the Sabbath was supposed to heal. Why? Because they never stepped into the restorative presence of God. The Sabbath is more than a break. It is an encounter. It is a moment when heaven draws close, when God quiets the world around you so He can speak to the parts of your soul you ignore during the week. It is a spiritual hospital, a refilling station, a reset button for your identity and your purpose. But if you spend the Sabbath simply sleeping, relaxing, and being entertained, even if harmlessly, you lose the chance to let the Holy Spirit repair what life has broken. Imagine giving someone a priceless healing remedy, but they use it as a pillow. That is what many believers do with the Sabbath. They use it for comfort, but not for transformation. They enjoy its peace, but not its power. They rest in the gift, but never meet the giver. Restoration requires intentionality. It means seeking God, meditating on His word, praying deeply, reflecting on your walk, healing relationships, forgiving offenses, cleansing the mind from worldly noise, and letting God speak into the areas you've been avoiding. When you treat the Sabbath only as physical rest, you create a dangerous spiritual pattern. You begin to see the Sabbath as optional, flexible, something you fit in around your lifestyle, and that makes you spiritually fragile. You may show up at church, but inside your heart is unchanged. You may look like you're keeping the day, but the day is not keeping you. And when the end-time crisis comes, physical rest will not prepare you to stand. Only spiritual restoration will. Think about it. The great controversy is not a battle over how tired your body is. It's a battle over whose voice your soul listens to. Restoration sharpens that spiritual sensitivity. Restoration burns away the distractions. Restoration fills you with courage. Restoration builds faith. Restoration anchors your identity in God. When the Sabbath becomes a day of restoration, you walk into the new week with clarity, strength, conviction, and a fresh outpouring of the Spirit. This is why Jesus healed on the Sabbath, not just because he had compassion, but because healing is the heart of the Sabbath. Restoration is the purpose. God wants to restore your faith, your peace, your focus, your relationships, your calling, your courage. But he cannot restore what you will not surrender. So yes, rest on the Sabbath, but don't stop there. Let the Sabbath restore you. Let it fill the empty places, heal the wounded places, and revive the neglected place. Because a rested Adventist may survive the week, but a restored Adventist can survive the final crisis. One of the most subtle, yet spiritually damaging mistakes Adventists often make is turning the Sabbath into a day filled with rules, regulations, and restrictions, instead of a divine invitation to revelation. Many have been taught what not to do. Don't work, don't buy, don't sell, don't cook, don't entertain, don't travel too far, but few have been taught how to enter the presence of God. This is how the Sabbath becomes a burden rather than a blessing. When rules overshadow revelation, the day loses its beauty, its joy, and its power to transform the heart. The Sabbath was never meant to be a checklist. It was meant to be a window into the heart of the Creator. It was never meant to be a prison of restrictions. It was meant to be a sanctuary of encounter. But somewhere along the way, many Adventists have allowed regulation to replace relationship. They measure their Sabbath keeping by external behavior instead of internal surrender. They feel righteous because they avoided certain activities, yet they never experienced the voice of God that day. They kept the rules, but they missed the revelation. When the Sabbath becomes obsessively focused on what is allowed or not allowed, spiritual legalism takes root. You begin living by the letter instead of the Spirit. You become more concerned with avoiding mistakes than receiving blessings. And slowly, the Sabbath stops feeling like a delight and starts feeling like a duty. You fear breaking a rule more than you fear missing the presence of God. And that is a dangerous place to be, because God never asked you to police the Sabbath. He asked you to enter it. Rules do not produce transformation. Rules do not produce intimacy. Rules do not produce worship. Revelation does. Revelation opens your eyes to who God is. Revelation changes your desires. Revelation humbles your heart. Revelation gives you joy, purpose, and conviction. The Sabbath is supposed to be a day filled with divine revelation. A day where the Word comes alive, where the Spirit speaks clearly, where heaven feels close. But if your entire Sabbath experience revolves around avoiding wrong actions, you will never taste the spiritual heights that God prepared for this holy day. Consider the ministry of Jesus. The people who opposed him most fiercely were those who kept the Sabbath with perfect rule following. They tithed mint and cumin. They counted steps. They memorized traditions. But in all their meticulousness, they missed the very Son of God standing in front of them. They kept the day better than anyone, yet their hearts were farther from God than the sinners they despised. Why? Because rules stole their revelation. They couldn't see God's love, power, or truth because they were too busy guarding the system they created. Today, the same danger exists in many Adventist circles. People debate whether certain activities are permissible, but ignore the deeper question, did I meet God today? They argue about what counts as work, but do not ask, did I surrender my here this Sabbath? They judge others' Sabbath keeping, but have not allowed the Spirit to judge their own. Rules can guide, but they cannot save. They can protect, but they cannot revive. They can structure, but they cannot transform. Revelation, however, changes everything. When God speaks to your spirit, the Sabbath becomes alive. When He shows you something new in His Word, rules become irrelevant. When His presence fills your heart, obedience becomes natural, joyful, and intimate, not forced. And here is the critical truth. In the final crisis, it will not be the rule keepers who stand. It will be those who have a living revelation of who God is. Those whose loyalty is rooted in love, not fear. Those who know God's voice, not merely His laws. The mark of the beast crisis is not about rules. It is about worship. It is about revelation, knowing who God truly is, and choosing Him at any cost. So yes, honor the boundaries of the Sabbath, but do not let boundaries become barriers to God. Make room for revelation. Seek it, expect it, hunger for it, because one moment of revelation will carry you further than a lifetime of rule-keeping without the Spirit. The Sabbath was made for man, not as a cage, but as a doorway. Step through it and discover the God who still speaks. One of the most damaging spiritual habits among many Adventists today is the pattern of living two different lives: holy on Sabbath, secular the rest of the week. On Saturday, the language changes, the behavior changes, the music changes, the conversations change, the attitude changes. But once the sun sets, the spiritual fire fades, and by Monday, the life looks no different from anyone else in the world. This double life is not only exhausting, it is spiritually deadly, because the Sabbath was never meant to be a performance. It was meant to be a lifestyle. The God you worship on Sabbath is the God you must walk with every day, or else the Sabbath becomes empty, powerless, disconnected from your real life. When you try to live in two worlds, you end up belonging to neither. You worship truth on Sabbath, but live in compromise during the week. You talk about holiness on Saturday, but entertain temptation on Tuesday. You preach about faith on Sabbath morning, but panic about every problem on Wednesday afternoon. The disconnect weakens your spirit. It drains your authority. It robs you of peace. It creates a spiritual split. You start to know the words of God without knowing the power of God. And eventually Sabbath becomes nothing more than a weekly reset button for a life that never actually changes. Sabbath holiness without weekday holiness is hypocrisy wrapped in church clothes. It makes you feel righteous while keeping you spiritually fragile. You can fool your church family, but you cannot fool God. He sees the life you live when no one is watching. He sees the choices you make when the pressure hits. He sees whether your faith is real or rehearsed. God is not looking for Sabbath believers. He is looking for surrendered believers. The world is watching too. Your coworkers, classmates, neighbors and friends see your life from Sunday to Friday. They may never hear your sermons or attend your church, but they read your character every day. And if your lifestyle contradicts your Sabbath identity, your witness becomes powerless. You cannot inspire people to follow a God you only follow once a week. The strongest message you preach is not your Sabbath observance. It is your everyday obedience. This secular Sabbath split is especially dangerous because it conditions your heart to compromise. Once compromise becomes normal in small things, it becomes easier in big things. And when the final crisis comes, when the world demands loyalty, when laws test your convictions, you will not be able to stand if your life has been built on part-time faith. The mark of the beast crisis will not suddenly create loyalty. It will reveal the loyalty you practice daily. If you cannot stand for God on a regular Tuesday, how will you stand when the entire world pressures you to bow? The truth is simple. The Sabbath is not meant to be one holy day in a week of secular living. It is supposed to be the anchor of an entire life. It is a weekly reminder of who you belong to. Not temporarily, not occasionally, but continually. Sabbath is supposed to shape how you work, how you speak, how you treat people, how you make decisions, how you handle temptation, how you carry yourself in the world. It is a sign of loyalty, not a weekend identity. Living a secular life 6 days a week and a spiritual life on the seventh is like eating poison during the week and trying to detox on Sabbath. Your soul becomes weak, your discernment becomes dull, and your passion for God slowly fades. You cannot live divided and remain strong. True spiritual power comes from consistency, aligning your heart with God every day, not just one day. If you want the Sabbath to transform you, you must carry its spirit into the other 6 days. Let your worship shape your work. Let your devotion shape your decisions. Let your Sabbath faithfulness shape your weekday character. Because the real test of an Adventist is not how they behave on Sabbath. It is how they live when the Sabbath is over. The strong will stand in the final crisis, not because they kept the Sabbath once a week, but because they followed the God of the Sabbath every day. One of the greatest mistakes many Adventists are making right now is forgetting or minimizing the prophetic reality that the Sabbath is not just a doctrine, not just a day, not just a belief. It is the final test of loyalty. It is the dividing line between those who follow God fully and those who follow Him only when it is convenient. The Sabbath is more than a weekly rhythm. It is a prophetic signpost pointing straight toward the final showdown in Earth's history. But when Adventists forget this, they begin treating the Sabbath casually, approaching it lightly, and living with a spiritual laziness that will not survive the crisis ahead. The great controversy is not simply a battle over lifestyle. It is a battle over loyalty, and loyalty is revealed through worship. The Sabbath stands at the center of that final question. Who will you worship? Whose authority will you obey? Whose voice will you honor? In a world that is rapidly drifting towards spiritual confusion, forced unity, counterfeit revivals, and false worship, the Sabbath remains God's visible signature on His people. It identifies those who stand with Him even when the world stands against Him. But many believers today have forgotten this truth. They have pushed the urgency of the Sabbath to the side. They have adopted a casual approach to the day God declared holy. They keep it when it's convenient, compromise it when pressured, and misunderstand its prophetic importance. This forgetfulness is dangerous, not because it leads to ignorance, but because it leads to unpreparedness. If you forget the purpose of the Sabbath, you will not have the strength to defend it when the world demands that you abandon it. The final crisis will not appear suddenly. It is already forming quietly through political movements, moral confusion, global unrest, and calls for religious unity. The world is being conditioned to embrace laws that will seem spiritual on the surface, but will wage war against God's commandments beneath the surface. And when that moment arrives, the real issue will not be about a day. It will be about allegiance. It will be about whether you trust God enough to risk comfort, reputation, income, relationships, even your safety. If the Sabbath is not your conviction now, it will not become your conviction suddenly under pressure. If you cannot stand alone for truth today, you will not stand when the world watches. If you break the Sabbath in small ways during peace, you will break it completely during persecution. This is why the Sabbath is a test. Not because God wants to trap you, but because He wants to prepare you. Loyalty must be practiced before it is proven. Character must be trained before it is tested. The Sabbath trains you to say no when everyone else says yes. It trains you to honor God above society's expectations. It trains you to resist pressure, stand in faith, and choose obedience even when it costs you. Every Sabbath is practice for the crisis. Every Friday sunset is a rehearsal for the final decision. Every choice you make around the Sabbath is shaping who you will be in the end-time conflict. But when Adventists forget this, they lose the urgency of preparation. They drift into spiritual comfort. They treat the Sabbath as tradition instead of warfare training. And slowly, they become spiritually soft, unready for what prophecy says is coming. This is why God is calling His people to wake up, to remember, to return. The Sabbath is not merely a weekly break. It is a prophetic seal. It marks those who choose God's authority over man. It distinguishes those who will endure the tribulation from those who will collapse under pressure. It separates the faithful remnant from the casual believer. The final test is not coming one day. It is coming soon, and those who stand will stand because they built a lifestyle of loyalty long before the crisis. If you want to be sealed, you must be surrendered. If you want endurance later, you need obedience now. If you want to pass the final test, you must stop treating the Sabbath as optional and start treating it as eternal. Because in the end, the question will not be, did you believe in the Sabbath? The question will be, did you remain loyal to the God of the Sabbath when it mattered most?